Good afternoon and welcome to National Black Child Development Week 2020. I'm Tobeka Green. It is my pleasure to welcome you. I am the president and CEO of the National Black Child Development Institute. National Black Child Development Week is an annual event. For 50 years, the National Black Child Development Institute has been committed to our mission to improve and advance the quality of life for Black children and families through education and advocacy. We develop and deliver evidence-based, strengths-based, culturally relevant, and trauma-informed curricula, training, and technical assistance. With our national affiliate network, we inform and advocate for equitable policies, legislation,
I thought you wanted
and
to have that up
regulations
in the beginning, but that's all
to
right.
ensure that our children are successful in school and in life. Annually, during the second week of May, we draw the nation's attention to the strengths, the creativity, the beauty, and the excellence of Black children, and the issues and challenges that persist in their ecosystem. As I've shared with you during the week, and thank you all for joining us, we send warm greetings to all of you as we as a nation and world are continuing to combat and adjust to the reality of COVID-19. Today, we are kicking off with an incredible group of panelists that include old and new friends, and also a member of the board of directors of the National Black Child Development Institute. We invite you all to not only stay and participate in this session, but to remain with us throughout the day as we will continue our conversations on mental health with a second session, and we will also focus during homeschool on practicing self-care. We will close out the day as we've closed out every day with an action-packed, happy half hour for children and families to join in together. We hope you'll stay with us. Jason, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tobeka. This is an honor, and since we are first up, I'm grateful to help guide the conversation, really focused on therapy for Black families and supporting children and parents. As you've mentioned already, Tobeka, this is we're living in unprecedented times, and for our community specifically, the repercussions and the implications of these times reverberate throughout a lot of different areas, right? Specifically, our emotional and mental well-being. So with that said, I want to get the conversation going because I'm honored to sit in this space with four amazing individuals that I'm sure are going to blow your minds with actionable tools and resources and strategies to help you all cope with this time. So with that said, Brian, Kelli, Onnie, and David, I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves briefly and kind of tell us a little bit about your work, and then we'll get right into it if that's okay. So I'm just going to go through in order of what I see on my screen. So Onnie, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Onnie Rogers, and as Tobeka mentioned, I'm on the board for NBCDI, and I'm also a professor at Northwestern University. I'm a developmental psychologist by training, and the work that I do really focuses on the social and emotional development of young people, looking at the school age from elementary through high school. So I'm really excited to be here and share some insights and learn from the panelists.
Great. Thank you. Kelli?
Yes, I'm Kelli Richardson Lawson. Pleasure to be here. I describe myself as a sunshine enthusiast, working to live my life with joy and to spread joy to others, the community, and our world. For work, I run a company called The Joy Collective. We're a marketing firm focused on cultural insights and connecting brands to culture. And then I started recently a project very close to my heart called the SonRise Project, which is focused on mental illness and addiction issues with our Black boys.
Thank you, Kelli. Brian?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brian Coleman. I am a high school counselor working across the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years. I'm the department chair for a team of 6 counselors. I work in Chicago Public Schools. I was the 2019 National School Counselor of the Year, as well as a Human Rights Campaign Upstander of the Year for 2019. I call myself the Unicorn Counselor, and you might see a lot of unicorn paraphernalia. I even have a unicorn behind me, only because I think it's so important that we take a strength-based approach to supporting our youth and helping them understand what makes them special and leveraging what makes them special, their strengths, to get where they want to go in life.
Thanks for that, Brian. You're doing God's work working with teenagers, man. And last but not least, David.
He definitely is. Hello, everyone. I want to acknowledge Big. I feel some kind of way in this moment. I don't have the language, but I look forward annually to being in space with the community, to hugging on the land, eyes on Tamika, and making sure that she's all right, and otherwise talking to each of you. So just want to acknowledge that this is different, and I'm thankful for the shift. For those who don't know, my name is David Johns. I teach, I speak, I write. I taught kindergarten, 3rd grade, so the opposite end of the spectrum where Brother Brian is. Had the pleasure of leading the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans under still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, until that was no longer an option. And I now am a PhD student at Columbia University and also lead the National Black Justice Coalition, which is a civil rights organization at the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQIA+ equality.
Thank you for that. Thank you, panelists. So let's get right into it. I want to start with a question that I think can help ground us in this conversation and perhaps shed light into kind of the way this will evolve. But if you can all share a little bit about how you've been personally coping with this COVID-19 crisis, where have you struggled and where have you thrived? So Onnie, you want to start?
Sure. So this is such an important question. So like I said, I'm a professor and then I'm a mom of 2. And so I'm certainly juggling the homeschooling, working balance. And a few weeks into it, I read a post where someone mentioned, we're not working from home or learning from home, but we are at home during a crisis, trying to work and learn. And for me, that was a really important paradigm shift. And that's something I think represents both a struggle in a way that I'm really trying to keep my well-being, which is to give myself space and acknowledge sort of the disruption. And then we're going to be talking about mental health today. So just the fundamental disruption to our sense of social and emotional safety and security. And then what that means for how we work, learn, think, and interact. So having that paradigm shift, I think, has been really helpful and something I have to repeat to myself occasionally in terms of adjusting expectations, giving myself grace, my kids grace, my partner grace, right? Just to think differently about what's realistic, what's attainable, and to, just allow us to reinvent sort of structures and think differently about how we fill some of the holes in that disruption that we're all facing. So I think sort of shifting from we're just doing this at home and it's all the same to fundamentally saying this is not the same, and how do we create a new normal in this and have grace for each other.
Thank you. I love that word grace. It's so important. Kelli, how about you?
I love the word grace. Yes, that really speaks to my heart. So for me, I think the biggest struggle, like many of us, is maintaining my business. I'm an entrepreneur, run a small business, keeping people without having to have layoffs. Thankfully, just got the PPP loan approved, so that was a blessing. And then really, the honest truth is, not gaining weight. I'm constantly running to the refrigerator. I'm constantly drinking, and much earlier than I would normally profess to drink. And then I have 2 teenage boys. And so having a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old that are used to being out and about, they're used to playing sports, they're used to being with their friends, and we're all quarantined together, really practicing the art of patience. And I love that word, grace, but practicing the art of patience and learning to listen and learning to love my boys in a very different way is probably one of the biggest challenges, but also a beautiful thing. And then I'm blessed and fortunate to be in Florida, quarantined together. So the weather has been fantastic. And so I am very blessed in that regard. So that's my story.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian?
Yeah, to be honest, it's been kind of a mess. I mean, I think every day is a new journey and discovery. I think for me, I am a workaholic. I'm a creature of habit and structure, and I get a lot of anxiety when I don't have that. And I think the global pandemic has definitely upended a lot of the structure that I know. I think the instinct in times like this is to try to sustain normalcy. I heard the doing exactly what we would do normally, but at home. That's not the reality. And I think I really needed to come to terms with this not being normal. And that freed me up to give myself grace and patience and empathy, and to create empathy in my relationships. And as I try to support my students and my school community from afar, I'm helping. And I find that that's something I continue to do, is help people understand this isn't normal. We're not thinking in a normal way. We're not experiencing in a normal way. We're not feeling. Nothing about this is normal. We are in crisis. And we have to keep that in mind as we think about what's most appropriate for us right now. And there's a quote from a movie. I also, in the shelter in place, I got Disney Plus. I had been trying to put it off, but I finally broke and got Disney Plus. And I watched, Frozen 2. I love Frozen. It's lovely. But the quote is do the next right thing. There's a song that's all about sort of understanding crisis and what to do when you are grieving and you're not sure what next to do. Instead of thinking 3 weeks ahead or a month ahead or a year ahead, do the next right thing for yourself, for your community. And that's really helped me on a daily basis maintain some sense of peace.
I love that. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I am thriving by simply being. As my brother Brian said, acknowledging that for most of us, I think a lot about James Baldwin. Jimmy's looking at me now, acknowledging that before the pandemic, our existence on a daily basis was almost always fraught with tension and reflections of things that exist in the world that could incite rage. Acknowledging the pandemic and the additional pressures, the thing that I sort of lead with is just being. Getting up in the day, whenever I get up, taking a shower if I decide to take a shower, and then moving through the things that I otherwise decide to do and that I'm not necessarily obligated to do, right? And I think that's important because Kelly mentioned being an entrepreneur, and I think that there are a lot of people also to the point that Onnie made, right, who are working from home rather than appreciating that we're at home, being forced to try and work. And for me, a lot of the work that I have otherwise engaged in the world is still happening. And now there's also increased need, right? And so I try and do as best I can to work out. I've also taken a liking to plants and flowers. Who knew? But I struggle a lot with some other things on the other end. So one, I struggle with feeling isolated. I spend a lot of time as an entrepreneur traveling. I spend a lot of time alone. But in this very moment, not being able to be close to my family in California, not being able to convene with my tribe anywhere. It's challenging, and it's nice to be able to engage virtually, but there's still something to be said for the nonverbal communication and the context clues and the ways in which you can be loved on just by being in someone's company. And so that's really challenging. And I also struggle with the increased needs, right? So as an organization that works to provide services for not only Black folks, but Black queer folks, there have been increases in the number of calls around mental health needs and stress. There are a number of folks who, in addition to housing and food insecurities, are facing increases in abuse and violence at home. And we're also providing a lot of support to young people who don't have the ability to be in safe spaces, right? Who are homeless, who are doubled up and couch surfing, and who are otherwise trying to find some semblance of care. And so the last thing I'll say is that I'm also very aware of my privilege. And the fact that I do have shelter and don't worry about food insecurities. And so while balance doesn't exist for me in the moment, I try and weigh those things against each other.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are just dropping gems. And I love the idea of focusing more on being and less doing, especially in this age of hyper productivity, right? I want to touch on something that is obviously at the core of who we are, and that is community, and this notion of community. How important is it for us to continue to nurture the aspect of community in light of social distancing? And what challenges and opportunities do you all see coming out of this new normal as it relates to building stronger community? We'll do a snake. So David, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think that as people connected to the diaspora, it's not possible for us to not be in community, right? I acknowledge the problem of using a double negative, but we've always found ways to be with each other, support one another, connect with, and find ways to empower one another, especially in moments of extreme trials. And so I am honored to have been pulled into groups, whether it's on WhatsApp or House Party or text messages or Zoom, right? Like some of these apps, I'm sort of zoomed out, right? Like there's that reality. But I am thankful that people are leveraging the tools that exist, in particular right now, technology, to be able to engage in building community. My specific concern when it comes to our babies is that I find a lot of folks right now are overemphasizing cognitive development while neglecting social and emotional development, right? And it's a sad fact, right, that too often we're forced to choose, do we do one or the other, when the reality is that we should always be doing all of it at the same time. But in this moment of crisis, I find that it's especially important to build communities such that babies feel well, right? So that they, with regard to their mental health, their physiological well-being, their physical safety are otherwise good, so that we can ensure that there's a foundation upon which we can build the cognitive skills that they're otherwise not getting in this very moment.
Thank you. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there's such a wonderful opportunity when we are experiencing a global crisis. It's not just a group of individuals, but we all can connect to this in different ways at different levels. And the amount of vulnerability and in many ways reflection that offers, I think it's really powerful as we move forward, that we think about, well, now that some of the noise may be removed from our daily hustle, and we are sort of left with our thoughts, and if possible, in some communities, in some spaces, solidarity. I know I live alone and it's quiet up in my house, but that's not true for everybody, given the circumstances. But I think it's important to think about, well, what is important to me and what do I need to feel well, and what aspects of community really help me and make me feel connected and engaged and validated and affirmed. That level, having a strong sense of affirmation and validation, I think is so incredibly important for us all. And it's really about how can we use, I would argue, technology. Technology has become such a significant lightning rod to talk about access and equity, but connection as well. And technology has become so important. You know, we heard Dave talking about the Zoom and the House Party and all of these different ways in which we might be able to connect. I think a lot about how can we continue to use technology to bring us closer, as opposed to us feeling isolated and further apart.
Yeah, isn't it ironic that the very thing that pulls us apart, right? Technology is the only thing now that's keeping us together. So I love that point that you made there, Brian. How about you, Kelly? What do you think?
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I think as a people, you know, we're a resilient people, and we have always, since 400 plus years that we've been in this country, have built something out of nothing. And so I think this is a huge opportunity for all of us to say, it's not the new normal, it's the new better. Well, how do we make ourselves where we are today? How do we create what's better? What's next? And what can we be doing? We're all stuck at home. You know, you want to talk to somebody, pick up the phone, get in touch with them. You know, reach out, build what's next. And, you know, I've heard Mickey Taylor speaking about this notion of being in labor and birthing what's next. And so if we think about it from that perspective, we're all in labor right now, and have an opportunity to birth something bigger and better than we've ever dreamt of before. And so that's, I think, an opportunity. And as a people, we know how to do that better than anybody else.
Yeah. Onnie?
That's great. I think, yeah, as everyone said, in terms of the leveraging technology is really powerful. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me is just the way that this being forced to stay at home and isolate has underscored and made salient the fact that we are so deeply relational and connected, how much we actually need those connections, right? In the everyday, it's like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. It's easy to roll into that. And so this time has sort of underscored, like, yeah, we really do need that, and it really does matter. And so how can we continue to prioritize relationships? And as you were saying, David, in terms of our kids, right? We are so quick to think about what they need academically or what schools can provide in terms of the knowledge, but we forget that the foundation on which they learn is feeling loved, feeling cared for, having their emotional needs met. And so how do we think about that in terms of what we can take from this time and what we can continue to prioritize, is that our relational connections are the foundations for our productivity. And so how do we tap into that? And I'll just say one little note about the technology is, yes, it's been an incredible connector, but I think, as David mentioned as well, there's that Zoom exhaustion and that technology exhaustion that happens. And so I think part of this emotional well-being is taking time to just check in. What do I really need right now? Sometimes what I need is to Zoom and connect, but sometimes what I need is to step back. You know, in what other ways can we connect with people, whether that's writing letters or, right, like making cards, like what other ways can we genuinely connect with people that doesn't require technology, so that we also don't fall back on feeling like the only way that we can connect is through this continued tech platform, but we can be creative to think of other ways that we can maintain and build those connections offline as well.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly important. I want to call out and kind of dig in a little bit deeper on something that we've all touched on high level, but I want to spend some specific time on this, and that is the impact on our young people specifically, and kind of the disruption that's occurred in their lives. We often talk about how this has disrupted our daily lives, our work, and how it impacts adults' mental health. But how has, in your experience and in your work, how have you seen this impact young people specifically, and what can we do to support them? So Onnie, we can start there, because you kind of alluded to it towards the end there.
Yeah, so I think one thing which we're seeing for ourselves, but certainly for our kids, and is a reflection of the fact that we focus more on cognitive skills and social emotional skills, is how skilled are we at checking in with ourselves? Right? And I think for kids, of course, for all of us, it's a learned skill. And certainly for kids in this time, it was this very abrupt and dramatic transition. And so one of the things is helping kiddos to check in with themselves. How are you feeling? What do you need? And that sort of capacity to do some introspection. How do I feel right now? What do I need right now? Right? And so being able to just tune in, I think, is an important component of this. And, fundamental to kids' overall well-being, is true of all humans, but certainly for kids, is to feel safe. And routines are part of that safety. And so my little one, my youngest is 4, and the first couple weeks were just really hard for her. She loves going to school, and every morning it was like her repeating the routine to us, and so confused as to why she couldn't do that routine. And so one of the things was, how do we create little routines at home? What does it look like to recreate routines and sense of safety and security in this disruption, right? So rather, being able to pinpoint what our kiddos really struggling with, and then how can we be intentional about repairing that disruption in the space that we're in. And in that process, right, also teaching them to identify, like, oh yeah, this is what helps me. This is what I need. For my older one, it was creating a very clear checklist where she can cross things off, right, and feel productive and feel clear. So how can we sort of help kids see what they need, give them strategies, and start to fill some of those holes that we know are being, disrupted right now.
Yeah. What do you think, Kelli?
Yeah, I love that. Although with 2 teenage sons, they're quite the opposite in terms of sharing what is on their minds. They want to be in their rooms, listening to music, or doing pull-ups on the pull-up bar, whatever it is. So the challenge I see, or I've at least experienced, I'll speak for myself, is really learning how to let them have space, let them have peace, and come out of their caves when they're ready to talk, which is rare. But then to be there and to listen and to try not to impart my way of doing things, which is very challenging for me as an A-type personality, many of us, or old school parenting type. It's hard not to say, boy, get out your room and come do your work right now. And my 17-year-old literally is in the bed still, right around the corner. And it's what time? 12:26? Yes. And so normal Kelli would be screaming and hollering and acting like a fool. But what I realized is that at the end of the day, he's going to get his work done when he gets his work done. And it's going to be okay. And my 15-year-old who just left to go to the gym, is like, you know, with his do-rag on, looking like Debo from Baby Boy. He is in a different world too. And so at the end of the day, he's gonna do his thing. He'll come back, he'll get to his work when he gets to it. So for me, I'm learning. I see the distress, but it's manifesting differently than what Onnie spoke about. It's very much not a routine. It's learning to let them have space and to breathe. And then to be there for comfort and support, which is completely new world, completely new world.
Wait, did you say he was going to the gym? Aren't y'all supposed to be social distancing?
So we're in Florida. The governor, crazy Governor DeSantis, cool. But they let 5 people in at a time, and this far apart. Yes, 5 people at a time.
That's why I said it, because I knew you were in Florida, man. It's a crazy time.
Yeah, governor. Yeah, crazy.
Hey, Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I was clocking the same thing about the gym. I was like, wait, what's going on? No, I think so many wonderful points have been made. I think what I would add when I think about what my students are experiencing, what I've seen, I think about grief, I think about loss, and I think about trauma. And I think we've all, at all levels, lost or in the process of losing a lot of different things in our lives right now. A sense of normalcy, our routines. I think a lot about my seniors who aren't going to be able to experience graduation and prom and any of the sort of the milestones, the rites of passage that we consider integral to the high school experience. And I think what I'm hearing in both perspectives thus far about space and flexibility, I think that's so incredibly important, because what might look, how anxiety and depression might present for one student or for a series of students can be very different as you talk to different people on different days at different times, and just allowing that flexibility. I ain't got no kids at home. I feel very grateful for that right now in some ways, but I also live alone and will be alone indefinitely for as long as we're on shelter in place. So you take it for what it's worth. But what I think is interesting, talking to a lot of my close friends who do have children across the pre-K through 12th grade spectrum, there's the projection of structure. The parents, guardians feel a little bit out of control. They project that onto their youth. And there's a lot of, well, I have to keep their schedule and we have to do these things each day. And we have these checklists and all, like the type A's. I'm a type A personality. I can relate to you, Kelly. I'm very much an A-type personality. But I think it's so important to create some baseline expectation. How do we sort of understand success in this environment that we're in? And then based on the baseline expectations that are communicated and are set between the parents and guardians and the youth, giving them the flexibility to get that done in whatever means and in whatever way is appropriate for them, but allowing that to happen in an organic way. And also I think about modeling, the importance of modeling for our children. How are they seeing you respond, right? If you've taken the, I'm all right, we got it, we're structured, we're moving, everything's okay, well, they internalize that. And that might make it difficult for youth to then be open with the struggles that they're going through, because we're all struggling in different ways. So I think it's so important to be vulnerable and model a healthy practice. We talk about the importance of social emotional learning in addition to cognitive development for our youth. Well, how are we showing that to our students, to our youth, and giving them space and encouraging them to engage in that process in a meaningful way?
Yeah, love that. And David, I want you to touch on that, but I also want you to touch on something that anyone else can chime in on as well, which is, you know, speaking of young people, how can we start to identify signs, early stages of perhaps depression and anxiety or other mental health issues? Because that's critically important, is trying to identify that before we start to address it. So if you don't mind, David, jumping in on that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and it's really hard to follow all of this Black brilliance, because I'm trying to think like, what could I add that's going to be fresh and new and not be redundant? But I want to acknowledge just the theme, I think, that tethers everything together is embracing disruption. And I also want to honor Onnie acknowledging that what our younger learners might need could be radically different in terms of how it presents from what both Kelly and Brian talked about, right? And so for everyone who is thinking about mental health, and of course, I was already going to talk about emotional growth and challenges, right? Too often our babies show up in our centers, are in our schools, and we demand of them to demonstrate what they know and have learned. Seldom do we ever ask them, what do you need and how are you, right? And so in particular, I think whether it's our 5-year-olds or our 15-year-olds and our 50-year-olds, there are a lot of us who are experiencing emotions, some of them exacerbated in ways that we've never experienced before. And sometimes you don't have the language, right, or the tools or the resources to process them or experience them. And so I think the first thing is for us to just acknowledge that and then to develop the language so that we can name some of these things. NBJC contributed to a report called Ring the Alarm that was submitted to the Congressional Black Caucus last December. This report was really important because what the data shows is that for every other group of children and young people throughout the country, with the exception of Black kids, the rates of suicide, ideation, and attempts and completions have decreased. But in the last 20 years, for Black kids of all ages, they've increased. And we don't collect data, intersectional data, that will allow us to understand how kids are showing up in intersectional ways if they're Black and have a disability, if they're Black and also LGBTQ. But we know anecdotally that kids that fall into those multiply oppressed categories are facing additional challenges and barriers that lead to them experiencing things like depression and suicide ideation. The real big challenge I'm thinking about Kelli and her boys is that in older kids, the signs really present like kids experiencing being kids, right? So they might be moody for extended periods of time. They might be extremely isolated and not want to engage with people or be in community. They are not talking about or naming their emotions and they're otherwise not feeling things, right? It's a little bit harder to think about how that manifests in our younger learners who simply might not have vocabulary to name the things that they're otherwise experiencing. And so I often remind people to do things. When I was a classroom teacher, we would use charts and pictures to ask kids daily to identify how they're feeling, right? There's, Onnie mentioned an Instagram image that's going around now that again reminds us you were not working from home, you were at home during a crisis trying to work. We could also think about the face charts that are different colors and have different facial emotions. Each of us should get in the habit of asking ourselves, how are we every day, right? The second thing is to be really precise about identifying what it is that we need in order to feel well, right? And so this I know is especially challenging because often people who have the greatest needs have the least amount of resources. And so leveraging things like Therapy for Black Girls, a podcast and resource and website and network of people that are working to make sure that we well is incredibly important. I listen to a podcast called The Read. Kit Fury and Crystal are two amazing co-hosts that talk about a lot of things that are relevant to my work, but they also prioritize mental health. And so again, there's talk space, right? For young people who are LGBTQIA, there's the Trevor Project has a suicide line. And so there are things for people that don't have the luxury and the privilege of being able to afford a quality and competent mental health provider, right? And so the last thing I'll just say is that it's really important for us, to your point, Jason, to stay connected. I know a lot of us are people of faith, right, in diverse ways, and we're still finding ways to show up in that community on Sundays. We should also be as intentional about showing up in community with people who are licensed to be able to ensure that we are well with regard to our mental health.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you kind of beat me to the punch because that was going to be one of my last questions, which was, if we can all kind of offer up tools, resources, strategies, anything that can help all of us kind of cope with this chaotic time, what would that be? Whether it's podcasts, whether it's, I personally like to tell people to journal, to cook with real food, right? Take the time to really, dive into the kitchen. So what other types of tools and resources or ideas would you all offer to kind of help us work through this moment? So Brian, whoever wants to chime in.
Yeah, sure, I'll go. First, you hit on the Read, you hit on the Trevor Project. The mic drop, that was there, right? What would I add to that? I'm a school counselor, so I'm always going to, in public education, so I'm always going to advocate on behalf of leveraging free tools and the tools that are accessible in your community and through your education, right? Through your educational system. If there are those relationships, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to engage with school supports. Are there school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors? Who are the providers that are easily accessible or available through your school community? And I think it's so important, not just now, but always for families to create strong lines of communication with the mental health providers, not just now, but as we move forward, making sure you know who within a school community you can access, who is sort of charged with supporting you. I also think a lot about self-care. One of my biggest tips, and you hit it on a little bit on this, Jason, talking about self-care. I break self-care into different domains. We talk about spiritual self-care. We talk about psychological, emotional self-care, physical self-care, and then that work life for our students, school life balance, right? And then I use a model, at least in my work, where there's a checklist and you go through, like, how often are you doing these things, or these things that you've even thought about doing before? And if not, how can you incorporate them into your daily practice? And I think that's so important. I know there's going to be the power half hour later talking about self-care, but I think it's so very important that not only do we talk to our youth about self-care practices, but then we model that in meaningful ways and show them how they might be able to incorporate this into their lifestyle.
Yeah. Kelli, Onnie, do you have anything to add there?
Sure, I'll go. I think, first of all, I want the name of all of those podcasts and all those ideas. So I did not write them down, but I do want them. So please, whoever's, keeping track, think those were great. So for me, I think in terms of resources, we created one. My husband and I created something called the SonRise Project. And what it is a safe space for parents who are dealing with mental illness, children with mental illness and addiction issues. And we created this in February because we've gone through a 2-year journey and realized that there really was not a safe space for parents like us dealing with Black and brown boys to come together. At least we couldn't find it. It may be out there, we couldn't find it. So we created a confidential space. People can call in Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. And we do not proclaim to be experts. We're not experts. We can only share our journey, but we have experts every Sunday. Amazing clinicians and therapists and brothers and sisters every week speaking on different issues. And so it could be relationship issues. It could be how to recognize signs of anxiety and depression, how to deal with trauma after suicide, or whatever it may be. And so we have created that, and it has been super therapeutic, both for ourselves, but also we're really impacting parents all over the country. And it's free and it's confidential and all that good stuff. So I think that's one, as a parent of a Black boy or a young man or young adult even. We have a lot of parents that call in saying, I have a 26-year-old who's back home and I'm really struggling. And they won't take their meds or they won't go to see a therapist. So that's one. On the personal side, I think, as I articulated a little bit earlier, my biggest challenge right now is eating and drinking. And so personally, I use the WW app, which is the former Weight Watchers, and it has point trackers and it has all kinds of stuff. It has a meditation tool. It is fantastic. So it helps me stay away from the Tostitos and the wine like I like. And there's a free Peloton app free for 90 days. So I do that every day, every morning. Yes. So I run out with my hip hop runs or my hip hop walks with Robin Arzon or others who I really adore. And that has been super helpful. So I'd say those two in terms of apps. And then of course, Audible, I'm listening to a bunch of books that I have always wanted to listen to, but have not had a chance to. So those are my tips.
Awesome. Thank you. Onnie?
Yeah, very good. I was going to mention some similar sort of small practical things, right? The library, Audible, especially through schools, you're able to get access to free Audible and free Epic and have just children's books that are read aloud. And it's been great to watch my kids sort of develop this new interest in Audible books, right? So that's been fun. And how can we just sort of expand our minds in that regard. The other was get outdoors, even if it's like walking around your own yard or, the block, just this idea of getting outdoors. And that's been something we've tried to implement in the mornings. It's everybody get up and move before we get going in the day, right? So just sort of implementing the outdoor space as much as you can and physically moving, right? Whatever that looks like. We've taken up as a family doing dance videos, hip hop workouts, and learning dance videos, which is hilarious and fun. As 6 and 7-year-olds try to move, but that's just been something we don't typically do, but it gets our bodies moving and sort of creates new family activity and memory. So that's been fun. And then the last thing I would say, which I'm probably the only one in my family that remembers or pushes to implement, which is silence. Let's turn off the music. Let's turn off everything for a little bit. Let's just have some quiet time. Let's go out on what we call a listening walk. We're not going to talk to each other. We're just going to walk around the block quietly. How can we implement silence? And I think that's very restorative.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
before we go to questions, I want to acknowledge that I agree with everything that everyone said. And for some of us, some of those things are not possible. So I keep muting my microphone because I live in Harlem. I'm sheltered in place at Harlem, again, completing my coursework at Columbia, and I'm 2 blocks away from a hospital. And so I am constantly reminded that we are living in a global pandemic, that there is so much that we don't know. And so the reality is that walking around the block is not something that I can do without extreme anxiety. And so for folks for whom that's not possible, or you don't have space to dance or whatever, I just want to honor that is true and highlight something that right. So let's go in a different direction. One is to try and take care of something. If you had asked me before the pandemic if I was a flower dude, I would have said no. But I enjoy every day looking at right now the tulips that I'm taking care of and watching how much they grow. I've signed up for a membership so that I'm going to get plants every month. And so taking care of something that you are responsible for, a puppy or plant, is something that we should all consider. For folks that can't move, who don't have access to a pool or a block to walk around and feel safe, put on some music. One of my healers and doctors reminds us of the importance of not only listening to music, but moving. So whatever it is that you like to listen to, whether it's Beyonce and Meg or Doc McStuffins, put it on and just dance. The last thing I'll say, very much connected to the importance of silence, is to daydream. So many of us are, to my sister Kelly's point, are forced to think about everything that we're responsible for, both now and in the foreseeable future. And so I encourage folks to either get a gratitude jar where you can write something down every day. If you can journal, like you said, Jason, and Brian mentioned, I do that as well. But just daydream, give yourself time and space to do whatever it is that your mind needs to do so that, again, you can do well.
Can I ask about that? Have you done electronic journals, or do you recommend an actual hard journal? Because that's something I've never done.
I recommend a hard journal.
Yeah, I think it depends on how it is that you work, right? Like I will sometimes, depending on where I am, jot thoughts in my phone, or I have an Evernote to take notes that are protected in my phone. But there's something to be said for sitting down with a piece of paper and a pen and writing. And so, a lot of this, and I would even try this with my kindergartners, is just to establish a writing routine, right? Where every morning you can make your tea or your coffee or whatever it is, that your juice, and just sit and write, and free write in particular. Don't try and force yourself to think through a structure. Just pick up the pen and write whatever it is that comes to mind.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing before we get into the questions, and that is, at a time where our default is to worry, and think about our own issues, one of the things that I'm trying to do more of is to do something good for someone else when I'm feeling super stressed and when I'm feeling worried. It's just, not only is it beneficial to the person, the act, but it gets me out of kind of my own head and into the mindset of service. So for whatever that's worth, if that helps anybody,
well, in addition to that, Jason, there's also science that talks about it does good for you physiologically, right? The idea of engaging in service, whether that's making a donation to organizations like mine or Kelly's, or otherwise helping somebody fill a critical need, finding masks, right? I've worked with a couple of artists to find masks for Black trans women in particular who are not given anything in this world, definitely not protection. But it also does something to you physically and mentally to do good for others.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys, so we have about 15 minutes. So I want to get into some questions here, and then let's just kind of, I'll read them out loud, and whoever wants to jump in, just jumps in. So the first question comes from Countess. Parents who are dealing with job loss and now worrying about rent and other bills are not thinking about their child's social, emotional, or cognitive learning. How do you help those families deal with the new normal / crisis?
I'll jump in quickly. And so thank you for that question. It's a critical one, right? As how do we think about, emotional skills or development when our fundamental basic needs are at risk and we're concerned about shelter and food. And so I would maybe just reframe that we aren't necessarily, that we don't have to think about as how do we teach them new social and emotional skills, but how do we think carefully about their social and emotional needs, right? So that those needs and that are just human for all of us are heightened when physical safety and security is disrupted. And so it is part of that package, we can't separate it out, and it's not maybe about teaching these new skills per se, but how do we think about nourishing our own and our kids' social emotional well-being in this time, recognizing that that is part of how they're going to experience the financial crisis and the home stability.
I think that that's right. I also would encourage anybody who's struggling with this to disabuse yourself of the idea that you're supposed to do any of this on your own. And so this is where we should remember that we're a village people, right? None of us are free, as Benjamin Hammer said in Lesson, until all of us are free. So tap in somebody else who has the capacity to hold that while you attend to things that are also priorities. So I agree and want to double tap what Onnie said, which is that their social and emotional well-being is important, period, full stop. That's a part of you ensuring that they're able to show up in the world and be, right? And if you can't do it, do the work now to prioritize finding somebody else, a mentor, a teacher, a counselor, someone, a friend, a family member, someone who can hold that space until you yourself can hold it again.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. It's not necessarily your responsibility to do, which is the theme that we're hearing, that you can absolutely tap in other parties. And also, if we sort of reframe the goal, in what way can you show up for your child, right? And often, especially if there's not the space due to the sort of those baseline needs not being met, I think about, well, how are you showing up for yourself first as a person, parent or guardian? How are you showing up for you? How are you making sure that your needs are taken care of? How are you filling your cup? Because as a health professional, as we all can relate, unless you are intentionally engaging in your own wellness, your own self-care, it's going to be very difficult to show up for anybody else. So how are you getting your needs met? And then in what way can you be present? And it might just be at this stage, talking to your children and saying, this is really tough for me right now. I don't have it all figured out. I may not know what tomorrow or next week or next month is going to look like for us, but I love you. And we are in this together, and we're going to figure out this together. And even if you don't see it and I don't say it, know that I love you and you're so incredibly important to me. And that could be it. That could be the social.
No, but it shouldn't be it, because accept that you need to say it, right? Like, it shouldn't be, to the earlier point I think Onnie made about, like, we allow ourselves to not do the things that are important. So we rush past sitting and building with friends and blame it on work. Like, we need to disrupt that, and words matter. There's power, precision. We all need to stop saying normal. Normal didn't work for us before. It's not working for us now. We also need to ensure that our children know that we love them. I just want to push again on this idea that they should imbibe it or otherwise feel it. Say it. Ask them, do they know it? Ask them what they need from us in order to feel it. Ask them to describe it. What does it taste like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? We got to move past sort of the taking for granted that our people are well.
Yeah. Just to build on that last point, I think the 5 love languages are critical. And you can do those things online if that's a possibility. But all the answers have been fantastic.
Yeah, and that actually answers another one of the questions. So I'm going to skip this next one and get to one from Cheryl. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but her question is, what do you say to a child who's asking, how long are we going to be in this situation? You know, how long are we going to be at home? No playground, no play dates. What do we say, and how do we help them through that?
You tell the babies the truth, which is that no one really knows.
That's right. Yeah.
That part.
A lot of good talk. We've had a lot of good talks about our assumptions about control and predictability, right? That this has made us face to face with the reality that we don't know what tomorrow brings, that we cannot control this entire, right? I can't tell you what's going to happen. Now, we live in many ways as if we can, and we do have things that are predictable and scheduled and planned, right? But this is a reminder that, like, we're not in charge of it all. We don't get to hold it all in our grips and predict and know. And that vulnerability in the modeling to say, and it's scary. And Mom, I wish I knew. And I wish I could say, in this many days, this is what, but I can't. And that's a good lesson for life, right? That there are many things we are not going to be able to predict and control.
And it doesn't have to be scary if I'm sorry, you still talking?
No, I was saying, and it not in a scary way, but just like that's part of being human, right? Being human means that we're vulnerable and dependent, and we have a lot of things that help us feel more controlled, right? Definitely, but it is also important to remember that vulnerability, and so we've had a lot of conversations with that.
If I can just interject here, because another question just came in that might be in your realm, Onnie. So since you're kind of on this path, I want to lob it to you, see if there's anything you want to add. But the question is, how do we help children that are specifically on the spectrum understand the pandemic?
Yeah, so I don't specialize in the study of kiddos on the spectrum, but the idea of being able to sort of imagine the alternate perspectives and hold, right, the dynamics, it's complicated. And I think that in general, the first step is that sort of sense of their own emotional connection and safety. So whatever sort of kiddos' cognitive abilities, emotional skills, developmental age, right, there's certainly a lot of particulars, but if we start from this foundation of how do I connect and communicate with my kiddo, and be honest that I can't explain all of this, right? My eldest just said, I just wish COVID wasn't a thing. That's like the only way she can, I'm like, I feel you, but I don't think she fully understands it. And so I think knowing your own kiddo and thinking first, how do I connect with them emotionally, make sure they feel emotionally safe and secure, how much they understand about the pandemic itself. I don't know what the exact strategy is for that, but their sense of security is critical.
So I want to jump in. I think it's different for all kids, right? And it is can be additionally complicated if they have particular needs, social, emotional, or otherwise. I think that the thing that I want to emphasize is that, yes, this can be uncomfortable initially, but there's a lot of liberation in us appreciating the truth about where we are. Consider, for example, the reality that science in the way in which we traditionally teach it in public schools in America does not allow for conflict. It erases the messy nature by which we come to understand things, that theories are tested and disproven, that planets exist in one decade and then shifts happen and then it's no longer a planet in another. And we have an opportunity now to acknowledge in real time that a lot of the constructs that we otherwise hold on to, like time and race and gender, are just that, social constructs that sometimes work to our benefit when the systems are working for some, also not for others, right? But in this moment where there's disruption, we can dig in deeper, we can interrogate why we made some of the assumptions that we made and dream anew what is possible for us, accepting that, yes, we wish we didn't have to deal with COVID or any of the other things that affect us, right? I'm looking at 2 Black women and I'm thinking about breast cancer and all of the other comorbidities that affect us as people. But that's our reality. The question is, knowing it, what can we do given all of the tools and the brilliance that has always existed within our communities, and in particular has resided within our babies?
One thing I'd like to add on to the conversation is sometimes it can be very easy to feel as though we need to protect our youth from disappointment. And I think that gets in the way of them building capacity for resilience. And I think in that question of, well, when can we come outside again? When can we go to the park? All of these things. The truth is so incredibly important, but also acknowledging that it's okay to be mad and upset and be disappointed that this isn't our reality right now. And then, well, what are we going to do with that information now that we have it? How do you cope with your disappointment? Coping skill development, I think, throughout all of these conversations is so incredibly important. How do we cope with the uncertainty? How do we cope with disappointment? How do we cope with the loss? And giving students and each other space to figure out what that means for us and come up with answers together.
Yeah. So folks, I apologize because I got kicked out and some of the questions that were in the queue I no longer see. So there were some really good ones there. So I apologize, but we've got about 5 minutes left. And I think it'd be great for us to maybe share some parting thoughts for the audience, and then also share where they can find you and where they can engage with your work. David, you want to start?
Sure, I was about to type it. I don't know that I have parting thoughts other than be gentle with yourself. And to go back to where we started, to give yourself grace. I will imbibe Sister Toni Morrison, who talks about us as people being equipped with the skills and resources and ingenuity to show up and show out at moments like this. So honor the power, but be gentle with yourself as you think about how to apply it. I, across all platforms, and at Mr. David Johns. Our website is nbjc.org, and I am a partner to NBCDI. Folks know how to reach me.
Perfect. Kelli?
Sure, I would say I love that. I love grace. That word just, it's so powerful. I would say from a mental health perspective, what I've learned over my journey the last several years is that, and he's not Nikki Giovanni, but Jay-Z talks about, you don't heal till you reveal. And so being okay with telling your story and sharing your pain and working through it openly and honestly helps reduce the stigma and helps others get help, right? So I think that has been the biggest learning I have, is being willing to share and reveal the truth that is not so pretty in my world, even though it looks so beautiful on the outside. Peel it back just a little bit and there's a whole bunch of cracks. And so being willing to share, being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to be open, and ask for help. I'm not sure who said that earlier, but ask for help when you need help, because we all need help at some point or another, and right now especially. So my contact information for the SonRise Project is Kelli with an I at the SonRise Project. All the information's on the website. It's thesonriseproject.com. It's free. It's confidential. There are weekly calls every week on Sunday mornings with experts.
Thank you, Kelli. Brian?
Sure. First, it's easy to find me. I'm Mr. Brian Coleman on almost everything. Instagram, Twitter, you can find me there. For follow-up, if you want to reach out for email, you can do the opposite, colemanbrianmr@gmail.com. What my final thought would be, just know that you are enough, and showing up as you are in this situation, given all the circumstances, is okay. There is no right way to do global pandemic. Let's just let that go, right? There's no right way to do it. We're all doing the best we can with the tools and resources and knowledge that we have. I love the idea of reaching out for help. I will self-disclose. I got a therapist. I will do virtual calls with my therapist on a regular basis, and having that support is so meaningful for me, and I'm a helping professional. And I believe the proof is in the pudding. I cannot help anybody unless I'm helping myself in meaningful ways. So find ways to help yourself and engage in that self-work, and then be very mindful and intentional in how you show up for others. I think that's so incredibly important.
Great point. Onnie?
All right, all great takeaways. This has been really fantastic. The little thing I jotted down was just to acknowledge, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, but that the skills and the ways that we're starting to privilege our relationships and connection and emotional health are skills that are going to go beyond COVID, right? This isn't just about managing through this crisis. It is about sort of thinking more deeply about what we need as human beings and what we ought to be evaluating and what we ought to be putting our time and energy into. And so as we cultivate these skills out of necessity right now, we're going to see the fruits of that on the other side as well. And we can continue these practices and being intentional in this ways. So you can find me at onnie.rogers at Gmail or at Northwestern, or just through a Google search. I usually pop up that way. Thank you so much.
Great. And then lastly for me, you can all find me at Jason_Rosario on all social platforms. My work around the lives of men, also at the Lives of Men on all social platforms, is really just dedicated on helping encourage men to look inside and kind of adapt healthier notions of what we're calling masculinity, whatever that means. But really my last thought is, this is an opportunity. I know that real people are losing their lives, their loved ones, their jobs. So I know that we're in trying times, but looking at the silver lining, this is an opportunity for all of us to recreate ourselves and emerge a lot stronger and a lot more present, not only in our professional lives, but in our personal lives. So I encourage everyone to use it as such. And I just wish that you all stay safe, stay sane, continue to take care of each other. And I'm going to pass it back to Topeka. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you all panelists for engaging me in this conversation. Please stay in touch. And thanks again.
Jason, thank you. Brian, Onnie, David, and Kelly, thank you for an incredible panel. As I said to our guest, you were in for a treat. This was incredible. We gathered not only those with expertise, but with sensibilities, and that is so important during this time. We are preparing now to transition to our panel that is scheduled to start at 1. It is mental health. It will be focusing on mental health and teen years, knowing when you need additional support. Kelli will be staying on to moderate that panel and will be joined by the amazing Janae Johnson. As we are transitioning, I do want to remind you all that our COVID-19 matching campaign continues. We are looking to support our communities holistically. The campaign is focusing on food insecurity. And so we invite you now through the end of the month to give and know that every dollar given up to $7,500 will be matched. Thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned. We have another incredible conversation coming up in just a few minutes.
Thank you.